laptop. The first step for me is getting this giant sexy tweeter into the car. In the previous install, we had come up with a mounting system like this that allowed us to tap into these two existing screws and hold the tweeter in place. This is a pretty good idea. The difference is this particular tweeter has wires coming out of both sides, so I need to go back into the computer and redesign this a little bit so that there's a provision for wires on both sides. Basically this, which was the first test to do that. The idea is that the tweeter would slide into place just like this, and then we could bolt it down into place. This was really close. We had to do a little bit more modification to it, which got us this guy here. This moved things around just a tad bit more, but allows us to get our tweeter mounted firmly in place into the factory holes. The other thing we had to do was print off some little spacers, these guys here, because the tweeter sits up a little bit higher. Peeling the paper off, and with a little bit of patience, it's all lined up, spaced properly, mounted in there nice and tight. Lined up with the hole here. This is now ready to go in. I'm gonna hand these off to Fernando so we can get him into the car. And I can work on the other side. Tweeters are back secured into the car. On the tweeter, there's a solid wire and there's a stripe wire. The stripe wire is the positive. That means the non-stripe wire is the negative. Next is to get the mid bass in. As you can see, Fernando has his door all sound treatment up and is using the fast ring. When using a fast ring, make sure you put it on the outside of the speaker, don't put it onto the top of the speaker. For this reason, if you ever have to take the speaker out, you don't want to destroy the fast ring. And with Fernando out of the way, it's screwed into place and we can get a much nicer view of it. That black on black dust cap looks very sexy in there. You won't have to worry about that showing through the door panel, but man, just knowing it's there, that's pretty sexy. Good job, Fernando. Fernando's getting this subwoofer ready. This is a dual 2 ohm driver. That means we're gonna have to wire it up in series. Positive here, loop around to the negative here. This positive and this negative will be what are going to go off to our speaker cup. The nice thing about these terminals, they're just like on an amplifier, so we can use wire ferrules. And he's also taken the extra time to add in a braided loom. Here's his ends here. Speaker cup is all soldered into place and ready to go. When we put an amplifier in the lab, it's just made to sit back there. We don't have to mount it to anything. But this is a big, heavy amplifier. We want to mount it to something because we don't want to have this sliding around back there. We want to make sure it's attached to something firmly. We also need to, on that, is be able to flip it up so we can get to the bias adjustment. Wiring this up is going to be a bit different as far as how you're going to think of what you would do with this. It's 6 channels, and most people go tweeters 1 and 2, mid bass 3 and 4, subwoofer 5 and 6. But each channel is the same, meaning 1 and 2 and 5 and 6 are exactly the same. You could run this on 3 subs. The crossovers are all the same. Everything is the same. But it has that mode 2 and mode 4 switch. Mode 2, you put the RCAs into 1 and 2, and it fills everything. In mode 4, you have inputs 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and 3 and 4 occupies 5 and 6. In this car, a subwoofer output and a front output. Plan is to turn on mode 4, run subwoofer into 1 and 2, 3 and 4 will be tweeter, 5 and 6 will be mid-range. That way we can use those inputs to populate just the front and just the sub. That means 1 and 2 is going to have low pass on, not the high pass, and we don't need the 10-time multiplier switch. If we want to do a subsonic filter, then yes, we can turn on the high pass, which we may once we get in there and start tuning it. Mode 4 switch is on, high pass 3 and 4 is on, and the 10-time multiplier, because we're running a tweeter. Low pass are both off. At 5 and 6, high pass is on, the 10-time multiplier is off. Low pass is on with the 10-time multiplier. That'll give us our band pass. We are going to be running this without a DSP because we want to let the amplifier do all the work. It would be real simple to hook up a DSP to this and just let that do all our crossover points, but we thought it's got it. Not everyone is going to be using a DSP. Let's set it up. First step is to get this secured to the board, but I really wish I could drill some holes in here for where this is going to go. I have an idea. With the amplifier screwed into place, I'm going to unscrew it now, remove the bottom, mark where my areas are, and then screw the amplifier back together. That way I can drill my holes through in the exact spot. I could measure it and do a whole grid thing, but there's only like 8 screws on here. It should go pretty fast. We have the 3 holes to easily get to our bias. Power and ground is located on this side over here, which is convenient because so is our power distribution block. Our RCAs are also located on this side. We don't need really long runs of each one of them. Let's get going. I've prepped the wiring for the amplifier install. The first wire I have here is the sub wire. It's a dual 12 gauge. We run independently. It's not a joined because it gives it way more flexibility. According to the bridged, which is located on the bottom, not here on the top, positive goes first or towards the left, negative is towards the right. If you're gonna use some form of distortion detector or crossover calibrator, when putting your speaker wires in, don't tighten them down all the way. Leave them kind of loose, just enough to hold the wire in place, except for on the subwoofer. You really don't have to do it on the subwoofer because you can easily just leave your subwoofer disconnected and use the wire ends here if you need to. Next is our tweeter. We've prepared the wire with wire ferrules on the ends. We use a twisted gray and white, and then we usually add in either an orange or a yellow, and that denotes tweeter. I'm going to tighten these up just enough to hold the wire. Moving on to 5 and 6. Same as these, we have a white, we have a gray, and the stripe we put on this is black. If there was also a mid-range, that would be blue. These are going to run off to the driver's side of the car. That is in the back here is where our connections are. We're going to zip tie these down into place. To get our holes lined up, we are going to use the wire ruler. You can pick up the wire ruler at Mobile Solutions, and it comes in a bunch of different colors. Where I'd like to put these holes, I have plenty of room. I don't need to tuck them into the amp. I'm going to use the other part of the wire ruler as my spacer. I drilled my first hole in to find out how far away I want it to be, and I can use that to line these up with the rest of the holes. Once the wire gets to this end point here, it's going to turn and go straight up. For the zip ties, I'm going to be coming up through this front hole closest to me, around, back, and down, and that's going to put this head towards the surface of the amplifier. The reason for that is I need to run these RCAs also this same way, and I want to have that head out of the way of this hole here closer to me so that I can then put the next zip tie into it. Tip your amp board up a little bit, feed it through, line it up. Make sure you don't pull these too tight. You want to be able to service them and get them in and out of place. Once you have them where you want them, pull the zip tie tight. When cutting zip ties, make sure you use some form of a flush cutter. That way you don't hurt yourself. With that first row of zip ties in, if we look at the back here, you can see what I was talking about with all the heads lined up in one direction. This hole is open. That'll allow us to feed our next zip tie in, and our head will be located at that hole. And we did the same along the side here. Next is going to be my 2 RCAs. They're going to come around and follow these same speaker wires and loop in. For the RCAs, we're going to be using 2 3-footers. One, we've put our white and gray ends on to differentiate from our subwoofer. They're going to go into 3 and 4, and our sub will go into 1 and 2. Figure out where your hole needs to go, and then drill away. RCAs have a tendency to want to twist when you're putting them in. To prevent that, put one of them in and just kind of work it until you get it to where it's going to lay flat, and then you can easily, when this is nice and limp, plug it into the top piece. Do the same on both. I'm trying to get these RCAs to lay flat against one another like this. Either way works. Like, you can lay them on top, you can lay them side by side, but I want them to lay neat next to one another. Lace your first one through and pull the RCAs back until you have enough there again to pull them in and out just like you did these. Don't make them super tight. Take your time at this point and get it right where you want it, and pull it tight. I like to pick one that's not my first hole, so I went over one. Now I can come back and add in that zip tie. Make sure that they're loose at this point and that nothing is pulled tight. Pull them in and out and check them, because when you only have 2 zip ties in, it's way easier to fix than if you have a whole row in and you're like, I really don't like how tight that is. Now I'm gonna go back and fix it. You got to start over. They're kind of no fun. With the RCAs in place, the last thing I need to do, which I was saving, is this subwire. It really just needs to come over to here. Nothing spectacular, and it doesn't need to tuck up into this at all. We have plenty of room. It just needs to come and turn this way For this, I'm just gonna drill my first hole to line up the logo. I want that to stay straight. Also, as I'm doing this, I'm putting my finger on here and I'm actually creating a bend here so that it rides over the top of these wires. And then once I get it to the height I want, pull that zip tie and that'll lock that bend in place. This is why we like to do individual wires, is because now I can make this turn fairly easily and I don't have a kinked up wire underneath there or anything like that. I can use my short wire ruler for this, push this up into place where I want it. Add in that first zip tie, and when you do that, pull the wire into the angle that you're looking for. Hold it, lock it into place. Once you get that second one in, that wire is not going anywhere. One thing I like to do that I've never really mentioned is on this last set of holes, here and then over here where the speaker are, I take the 8-inch zip tie, which is thicker and stronger, and I put that through, and that just kind of finishes off these wires here on the end a little better than the 4-inch zip tie. All the sound side is done. That leaves me just this right here, which is the power section. I've made up 2 runs of 4-gauge, 1 ground, 1 power, and a 3rd run of remote turn on. Covered them in braided flex loom. First up is the ground. When running these wires, you kind of got to figure out what needs to go where and which one of these you're going to put in first. If you're up against a short distance here, we definitely want to do the outside wire. If you have to make a quick turn, then you'd want to do the inside wire. These are things that you have to think about when building your amp rack. 4-gauge fits in here beautifully with the ferrule on it. Tighten it down. Add in the remote turn on. These only need to come up about halfway like this and turn. Looking at this, the main power is definitely where we want to start fixing into place. I'll make my first hole here so I know where I want them to be. Short wire ruler will work great on this. For this, I need to make sure that the head is towards the back side here, because my next one is going to come through this hole. I like to get my first and last zip tie, mainly my last zip tie, so that I don't have to worry about it flopping constantly off the end of the amp board. And naturally the first one so I can position it properly. I get it where I want it, tighten that one up. Leave the last one loose for now. Get that second one in place. Line them both up nice and straight. Pull those zip ties tight and then flush cut them off. When you get to the edge of an amp rack like this, sometimes drilling a hole in here is more or less pointless. You can easily just wrap the zip tie around the edge. Just drilling one row of holes sometimes make a lot more sense. The head is along the outside here because I need this hole open for the ground. And that is the power side all done, tucked in and routed around to where it will go into the car. And this is the final. This is what she's gonna look like.